We're going to talk Real ID with AAA Michigan this morning. If you don't know, the deadline for getting a Real ID is quickly approaching, and if you don't have one by May 7th, you might run into some serious travel headaches. So helping us break down what you need to know is Adrienne Woodland from AAA. Thank you so much for being live with us this morning. Can you start by explaining what a Real ID is? Why is this important for folks to have one before that May 7th deadline?
Yeah, so Real ID, it comes from the government, and it's something that travelers will need to board a domestic airline flight starting as of May 7th. So if you do have plans to travel domestically this summer, it's really important that you stop by the Secretary of State and make sure that you have your Real ID.
Yeah, it's a really important one. It's different than what you might have if you don't have that star. And again, it could be a star with a circle or star with the Michigan logo in there in the top right corner of your ID. That's going to be very important because not only do you need it to fly, Adrienne, you also need it to get it to government buildings, so federal buildings as well. So why was the Real ID Act implemented, and why is it, what problem is this meant to solve?
Yeah, so Congress passed the act in 2000 on the recommendation of the 9/11 Commission. And it's a federal law. It's applicable to all states. And it helps to, again, have better security to make sure that, again, everyone has that real ID by the deadline of May 7th. Particularly, like you said, if you're going to be boarding a domestic flight, you also need it for access to certain federal facilities like nuclear sites, um, government buildings, certain federal buildings that require ID, and military bases.
Okay, yeah, so that's all good to keep in mind. This deadline, it's been extended several times. I remember like back during COVID, I remember the deadline just kept getting extended and extended and extended. What makes this time different, and why shouldn't people be waiting until the last minute to do this?
Well, actually, again, that date takes effect in less than 40 days, and it's very unlikely that it's going to be extended again this time. So you don't want to wait until the last minute. You want to make sure that you have your real ID. So definitely check with the Secretary of State website. In Michigan, if you do have an enhanced driver's license, that's already real ID compliant.
Okay, that's interesting. Is that what is the reason behind that? I guess why is an enhanced driver's license different than just a real driver's license?
Well, again, an enhanced driver's license, particularly here in Michigan, it allows you to access foreign countries like Canada or Mexico. So again, it is real ID compliant. One of the things that you can do if you don't have a real ID is you can board a domestic flight using your passport, but most people don't carry their passports
Right.
when they're taking a domestic flight. So it's really important that you do have that real ID. Most people carry their driver's license or their state ID with them, and it'll allow you to board your flight. Again, particularly if you have travel plans for this summer.
Now, again, we should reiterate, this is for domestic flights. If you're flying internationally, you still need that passport, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. If you are flying internationally, you still need your passport. But the real ID is for, again, domestic flights, as well as access to certain federal facilities, like I said, military bases, nuclear facilities, and certain federal buildings that require identification.
So what are the potential consequences for travelers who don't have that real ID by May 7th? Is there a fine involved or no? Or is it just really the consequences is you won't be able to board that domestic flight past May 7th if you don't have that star?
Exactly. The main consequence is you will not be able to board that flight that you paid for the trip that I'm sure you're anticipating going on. So again, it's really important if you already have plans, vacations that are already planned, that you make sure that you get your real ID before May 7th.
Yeah, so what do people need to do to get that real ID? Are there documents that are required for this? Do we have to go in person or can we do it online?
First, you can go and check at the Secretary of State's office for the documents that are required. I personally have a real ID. I just needed to take my passport with me to the Secretary of State's office. You do most likely need to go into the office because, again, it's a new license, so you probably have to take a new picture.
Okay, yeah, that's a good point. I just moved from Indiana here to Michigan less than a year ago, and I had to go through that exact same process, and they gave me my Real ID when I went through that process. Are there any common mistakes or missing documents that tend to slow this process down, the application process for Real ID? If so, what is that? If not, then I guess that would just be the case, is you just go into the SOS office?
Yeah, it's really helpful if you can ahead of time go to the Secretary of State's website and check and make sure the documents that you need. Also check and make sure, that your license is Real ID compliant. Folks may not realize that they have a Real ID already. So again, you want to check that, go to their website, check to make sure the documents that you may have, that you may need, that you have them and, schedule that time to go into the Secretary of State's office to get that Real ID.
Now, for those of us who, we have not really taken a really close look at our driver's license, if we're looking at it, what should we look for to make sure that if we have a Real ID or not?
So, Real ID compliant cards will have one of the following markings. It's a star-like marking, usually in the upper right-hand corner. Michigan, it can be a star within the state, but it's usually on the upper part of the card, and it is a star-like marking.
Okay, so keep that in mind. And again, if you, I guess, live in another state too, just make sure you have that gold star in the top right corner there. What about children or younger travelers that, may not have an ID? Do they need an ID to board a domestic flight, a real one, a Real ID as well?
Great question. The Real ID is for individuals that are 18 and over. So again, it's the Real ID. It's either a driver's license or a state issued identification card.
Okay, and of course, the differences between Real ID application, does that vary from state to state, or is it pretty similar when we're talking state to state?
There are some things that may vary from state to state. That's why, again, it's really important that you go in Michigan, go to the Secretary of State's website, and other states go to the applicable DMV website to check and see what type of documentation you need.
Yeah, I guess what is your biggest piece of advice right now? You guys are the travel organization, right? So what is the biggest piece of advice that you have for folks that just haven't gotten this done yet?
The biggest piece of advice, if you know you plan to, take a vacation this year where you're going to be flying domestically, it's really important that you start now in the process to make sure that you have your Real ID. Like me personally, I already have a flight booked in June. I'm glad I got my Real ID. I actually got it back in 2019 or 2020, but it was a while ago back before that deadline was extended.
Yeah, it's some good advice there. I mean, just go ahead and get that done. Is there anything else that I haven't asked you that you think is important for folks to know as that Real ID deadline looms? Of course, I know we've kind of covered most of it, but is there anything else that you think is important for folks to know?
Again, it's really important that you, again, assess your lifestyle. If there are like federal buildings or facilities that require ID that you'll be going into maybe regularly or a couple times a year, again, it's important, to have that Real ID, even if you are not someone who flies, domestically. But again, it's really important if you plan to travel this summer, anytime past May 7th, that you get that Real ID so that you can board your flight and enjoy your vacation or your trip.
Absolutely. Let's put some information on the screen. Let's go ahead and show that graphic again. The Real ID deadline is May 7th. It's needed to fly and visit certain government buildings, federal facilities, that is. Michigan.gov is where you can find the information to go and get your Real ID here in the state of Michigan. Again, deadline May 7th. Adrienne, we really appreciate your time this morning.
Thank you for having me.